August 1948. A real estate agent stands outside the gates of Long Island's second-largest mansion, OHEKA Castle. 127 rooms, 400 acres, built for $11 million 30 years earlier. The asking price? $1. Nobody wants it. The agent has tried for months to give this palace away. Literally, give it away. No takers. The mansion was designed to last forever. French chateau architecture, Indiana limestone that would survive centuries. 200 men worked 5 years to build it. Now it sits empty. Windows broken, roof leaking. Vandals have stolen everything removable. This was the home of Otto Kahn, the man who financed half of Broadway, the man who bailed out failing banks, the man who owned more art than most museums. His fortune was gone, his family scattered, his palace abandoned. This was the first time OHEKA nearly disappeared. There would be 2 more. This is the story of America's most expensive mansion that became worthless. How one banker built a dream too beautiful to keep, and how that dream refused to die. The real estate listing in August 1948 was absurd. OHEKA Castle, Cold Spring Harbor, Long Island, 127 rooms, 32 bedrooms, 39 bathrooms, 200 servants' quarters, a private power plant, formal French gardens covering 23 acres. Listed price, $1. The only condition was the buyer had to maintain the property. That condition made it impossible to sell. The annual maintenance costs exceeded $200,000. Property taxes alone consumed $50,000 yearly. The heating system burned coal by the ton just to keep the pipes from freezing. Insurance was astronomical. Staffing requirements were crushing. A skeleton crew of 20 people could barely keep the grounds from returning to wilderness. The mansion needed 60 servants to function properly. Nobody in 1948 could afford that. The great fortunes that built such places had been taxed, divided, destroyed by the Depression. The families who might have purchased OHEKA in 1920 were gone. Their children lived in apartments. The era of private palaces had ended. OHEKA was a monument to a dead age. Beautiful, impractical, worthless. The agent walked the property with potential buyers. Most turned around before reaching the main entrance. The driveway alone was a quarter-mile long. Trees had grown wild. Weeds choked the formal gardens. The fountains were dry and cracked. When buyers did enter the house, they found chaos. Homeless people had sheltered there during winter. Vandals had stripped anything valuable. Copper pipes were gone. Light fixtures removed. Fireplaces had been torn apart for their marble mantles. Windows were shattered. Rain had leaked through the roof for years. The ceiling plaster was falling. Some rooms had mold covering the walls. The smell was overwhelming, decay and neglect. A few investors considered demolition. The land alone was worth something. 400 acres on Long Island could be subdivided into building lots. But demolition would cost a fortune. The walls were 3 feet of solid limestone. The roof was slate. The building had been engineered to last centuries. Taking it apart would require months of work and industrial equipment. Nobody wanted to invest that much in destroying something. So OHEKA sat, empty, rotting. A palace nobody wanted, not even for $1. Understanding how this happened requires going back to the beginning, to 1893, to a 26-year-old German immigrant standing on a dock in New York Harbor. Otto Hermann Kahn arrived in America with almost nothing. He was Jewish. He was ambitious. He spoke 4 languages. He understood banking. That combination would make him one of the most powerful men in America within 20 years. Otto was born in Mannheim, Germany, on February 21, 1867. His family was middle class. His father worked in banking. Otto received good education. He studied languages, mathematics, music. The family loved opera. They attended performances regularly. Otto developed a passion for music that would define his entire life. At 17, he took a position as an apprentice at Deutsche Bank in Karlsruhe. He learned the fundamentals of banking: deposits, loans, interest rates, risk assessment. He was good at it. Numbers made sense to him. Patterns emerged that others missed. He could see when companies were undervalued or overextended. That talent for analysis would make him wealthy. But Germany offered limited opportunities for a Jewish banker. Anti-Semitism was rising across Europe. Professional advancement had ceilings. Otto recognized this. At 21, he moved to London to work at Deutsche Bank's London office. The city was the financial center of the British Empire. Money flowed through London from every corner of the globe. Indian tea, African diamonds, American railroads, Australian wool. Everything was financed through London banks. Otto spent 5 years there learning international banking. He made connections. He observed how the great British merchant banks operated, how they assessed risk across continents, how they moved money through international networks. He learned the mechanisms of global finance. Then in 1893, he made the critical decision. He would go to America. The United States was growing explosively. Railroads were expanding. Cities were rising. Industry was transforming the economy. Opportunities existed that Europe could not match. The only question was which bank to join. Otto chose Kuhn, Loeb and Company. It was one of New York's most prestigious investment banks, founded by German Jewish immigrants, specializing in railroad financing. The firm had funded the Union Pacific Railroad and other major projects. It was second only to J.P. Morgan in power and influence. Otto arrived with a letter of introduction. He met Abraham Kuhn and Solomon Loeb. He explained his experience in London, his understanding of international finance, his ability to assess railroad investments. They hired him. Otto started as a junior associate. His salary was modest. His office was small. None of that mattered. He was inside one of America's most powerful institutions. He worked constantly. He analyzed railroad balance sheets. He traveled to inspect properties. He met with company executives. He assessed which railroads were viable and which were heading toward bankruptcy. He proved reliable. His assessments were usually correct. Within 2 years, he was promoted. By 1897, just 4 years after arriving in America, he became a partner. This was extraordinary. Partnership at Kuhn, Loeb meant wealth and power. Partners shared in the firm's profits. They made decisions about which projects to finance. They dealt directly with the most powerful businessmen in America. Otto was 30 years old. He had gone from immigrant to partner at one of the nation's elite banks. The speed was remarkable, but it was justified. Otto had a talent for seeing what others missed. He understood that railroads were not just about laying track. They were about creating economic systems. A railroad that connected mines to factories, to ports, created value at every point. Financing those connections properly could generate enormous returns. Kuhn, Loeb specialized in exactly this type of analysis. The firm financed Edward Harriman's railroad empire. Harriman was rebuilding the Union Pacific and Southern Pacific railroads. He needed massive capital. Kuhn, Loeb provided it. Otto was deeply involved in these deals. He structured the financing. He negotiated terms. He managed relationships with European investors who provided much of the capital. The deals made enormous profits for everyone involved. By 1900, Otto was wealthy. He married Addie Wolfe, daughter of a British banker. The wedding connected him to another prominent banking family. Addie was elegant, well-educated. She moved comfortably in high society. The marriage was strategic, but also genuine. They would have 4 children together. They purchased a mansion on Fifth Avenue in New York City. The address mattered. Fifth Avenue was where America's wealthiest families lived. Vanderbilts, Astors, Morgans. Living there meant you belonged. Otto renovated the house extensively. He filled it with art, old master paintings, European furniture, Chinese porcelain. He was building a collection that would eventually rival museums. But Otto had a secret, something that made him different from other bankers. He loved the arts more than he loved banking. He attended opera constantly, Broadway shows, symphony concerts. He collected art obsessively. He read poetry. He associated with artists and writers and composers. This was unusual for a banker. Most Wall Street men viewed art as decoration. Otto viewed it as essential. He believed art elevated civilization, that great societies produced great culture. He wanted to help create that culture in America. In 1903, Otto became involved with the Metropolitan Opera. The Met was America's premier opera house. It had opened in 1883 on Broadway and 39th Street. The building was massive, could seat 3,800 people. It featured the best singers in the world: Enrico Caruso, Nellie Melba, Lillian Nordica. These were names that drew crowds, but the Met was struggling financially. Opera was expensive to produce. A single production could cost $50,000. Sets had to be built, costumes made, musicians paid, singers paid. The ticket revenue never quite covered costs. Every season ended with a deficit. Someone had to cover that deficit, or the Met would close. Otto joined the board in 1903. He immediately recognized the problem. The Met needed a reliable source of funding, not just emergency gifts, but planned, systematic support. He began contributing money to cover seasonal deficits. The first year he gave $20,000, the next year $30,000. By 1910, he was giving $100,000 annually. This was separate from his personal box subscription. He maintained a box at the Met, attended performances twice weekly during the season, brought guests, introduced them to opera. He wanted to build the audience, create appreciation for the art form, but his real contribution was financial. Without his money, the Met would have closed. He knew this. The board knew this. The singers knew this. Otto was saving American opera. His involvement went beyond writing checks. He helped select repertoire. He pushed for modern works, not just Italian classics. He wanted the Met to perform contemporary composers: Wagner, Strauss, Debussy. He helped bring Gustav Mahler to New York to conduct. Mahler was one of the greatest conductors in Europe, the Vienna Court Opera. Otto convinced him to come to New York, offered him extraordinary fees, guaranteed artistic freedom. Mahler came in 1907. He transformed the Met's orchestra, raised the performance standards, introduced new interpretations of classic works. His presence elevated everything. But it was expensive. Mahler's fee alone was $75,000 per season. Otto paid most of it personally. He did not publicize this. He wanted the credit to go to the Met, not to himself. This pattern of quiet generosity defined his entire approach to philanthropy. Otto also supported Broadway. This was unusual. Most wealthy men viewed Broadway as commercial entertainment, not worthy of serious support. Otto disagreed. He believed musical theater was an American art form. It deserved development. He began financing productions. He worked with producers, provided money for shows that could not get conventional backing. Experimental works, difficult subjects, productions that would lose money but might be artistically significant. In 1915, he helped finance the Washington Square Players. They performed one-act plays in a small Greenwich Village theater. The audience was tiny. The productions lost money consistently, but the work was innovative. The Washington Square Players would eventually become the Theater Guild, one of America's most important theatrical institutions. Otto's early support made that possible. He financed the Provincetown Players. They operated out of a small theater on McDougal Street. They produced new American plays, the kind of work commercial theaters rejected. In 1920, they produced Eugene O'Neill's The Emperor Jones. The play was revolutionary, a black actor in the lead role, experimental staging. Subject matter that made audiences uncomfortable. No commercial theater would touch it. Otto provided the financing. The production was critically acclaimed. It established O'Neill as America's greatest playwright. None of this would have happened without Otto's money. He supported dancers. Isadora Duncan toured America in 1914. She was controversial. She danced barefoot. Her movements were considered scandalous. Many cities tried to ban her performances. Otto helped finance her tour, ensured she could continue working. He supported visual artists. He purchased paintings from living artists, not just established names. Young artists who were struggling, unknown painters who showed promise. He bought their work, gave them money to continue painting, asked nothing in return, did not demand recognition, just wanted to help artists survive. His art collection grew enormous. By 1920, he owned over 2,000 paintings, sculptures, tapestries, furniture, ceramics. His Fifth Avenue mansion was filled. OHEKA was filled. He was running out of space, but he kept buying, kept supporting artists, kept believing that wealthy men had obligations to culture. The amounts were staggering. By the 1920s, Otto was giving away more than $1 million annually to arts organizations. $1 million in 1920 had the purchasing power of approximately $15 million today. He was giving away a fortune every year. This was separate from his art collecting, which consumed another fortune. A major painting might cost $50,000. He bought multiple paintings yearly. His total annual spending on art and culture exceeded $2 million. His income from Kuhn, Loeb was perhaps $3 million annually. He was spending 2/3 of his income on culture. The remaining third covered his living expenses. OHEKA cost $200,000 yearly to operate. The Fifth Avenue mansion another $100,000. Travel, clothing, food, entertaining. All of that consumed money. Otto was barely breaking even. Some years he spent more than he earned. He drew down his capital. His partners at Kuhn, Loeb were horrified. They watched him destroy his fortune. They urged him to stop, reduce the cultural spending, keep more money, build his estate for his children. Otto refused. He believed wealthy men had obligations, not just to make money, but to use it for civilization's benefit. He saw himself as a patron in the European aristocratic tradition, a Medici for modern America. His wealth should elevate culture, create beauty, support genius, make possible what the market alone could not sustain. But Otto had a philosophy. He believed wealthy men had obligations, not just to make money, but to use it for civilization's benefit. He saw himself as a patron in the European aristocratic tradition, a Medici for modern America. His wealth should elevate culture, create beauty, support genius, make possible what the market alone could not sustain. This philosophy would eventually bankrupt him. But in 1910, he was still accumulating wealth faster than he gave it away. Kuhn, Loeb continued generating enormous profits. Otto's share kept growing. He had more money than he could spend on Fifth Avenue mansions and art collections. He wanted something more, something that would be permanent. A monument, not to himself, but to what wealth could create. He decided to build an estate, not just a large house, a palace, something that would rival anything the Vanderbilts or Rockefellers had built. Something that would last centuries, a statement that art and beauty mattered more than practicality or profit. He began looking for land on Long Island. Long Island in 1910 was transforming. The western end near New York City was already developed, but the North Shore remained relatively rural. Wealthy families were beginning to build estates there. The area was becoming known as the Gold Coast. F. Scott Fitzgerald would later set The Great Gatsby there. The appeal was obvious: beautiful coastline, rolling hills, close enough to New York for business, but far enough for privacy. Large parcels of land were still available. Otto wanted something special. He searched for months. Finally, he found it. A property near Cold Spring Harbor, 400 acres on the highest point on Long Island. The location was perfect. The elevation was 390 feet above sea level, higher than anything else for miles. From that hilltop, you could see across Long Island Sound to Connecticut. On clear days, you could see the Manhattan skyline 25 miles away. The symbolism was perfect. Otto would build his palace on the highest ground, looking down on everything, visible from everywhere. A beacon. He purchased the property in 1914 for $110,000. Then he hired architects. Otto interviewed several firms. He wanted the best. He settled on Delano and Aldrich. The firm was based in New York. William Adams Delano and Chester Holmes Aldrich had met at Columbia University. Both studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. The French classical training was essential. Otto wanted a French chateau, not a copy, but an American interpretation. Something that captured the elegance of French architecture but built with American ambition and scale. Delano and Aldrich understood this perfectly. They had already designed estates for the Vanderbilts and other prominent families. They specialized in adapting European styles for American clients. The initial plans were breathtaking. The main house would have 127 rooms. The style would be French classical revival. Limestone facade, steep roofline, symmetrical design. But the scale would be American. Bigger than anything in France, longer, taller, more rooms, more everything. The house would stretch 340 feet across the hilltop. It would be 5 stories tall, including the basement and attic levels. The facade would feature regular rows of tall windows. The roof would be slate, dark gray, steep pitched in the French manner. The whole structure would be designed to last indefinitely. This was not a house built with wood frame construction. This would be steel and concrete and limestone. Fireproof. Essentially permanent. The plans included more than just the main house. Otto wanted formal gardens, not simple lawns but geometric French gardens. Parterre gardens with precisely trimmed hedges forming patterns, reflecting pools, fountains, statues, gravel paths. The gardens would cover 23 acres. They would require a dozen full-time gardeners to maintain. There would be greenhouses for growing flowers year-round, a golf course on the property, tennis courts, a swimming pool, staff housing for the small army of people needed to run such an estate, a power plant, because local electricity was unreliable. The estate would generate its own power, its own heat. It would be self-sufficient. A complete world unto itself. The estimated cost was $4 million. This was 1914. $4 million was an enormous sum. To put it in perspective, skilled workers earned about $500 per year. $4 million represented 8,000 years of skilled labor wages. No expense would be spared. Otto approved the plans immediately. Construction began in the summer of 1914. The timing was terrible. On June 28, 1914, a Serbian nationalist assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria in Sarajevo. Within weeks, Europe exploded into war. World War I began. The war would last 4 years and kill 17 million people. It would bankrupt European nations, destroy empires, reshape the world. It would also make Otto's construction project far more difficult and expensive. Building materials became scarce. Steel was diverted to war production. Shipping was disrupted. Labor became expensive as men enlisted or were drafted. What should have taken 3 years took 5 years. What should have cost $4 million cost $11 million. Otto did not care. The war would end. The money did not matter. He wanted OHEKA completed properly. He would pay whatever it cost. The name OHEKA came from his initials, Otto Hermann Kahn, OHEKA, simple, direct. It would be his monument. He would not compromise. The construction site covered the entire hilltop. 200 men worked daily, more during peak periods. They came from all over. Italian stonemasons who had learned their craft in Europe, Irish laborers who dug foundations, German carpenters who understood precision, Polish workers who handled the heavy lifting. Each group had their own foreman, their own language, their own culture. The site was like a small city. Temporary buildings housed tools and materials, a field kitchen fed the workers, medical supplies were kept on site for injuries. Construction accidents happened constantly. Men fell from scaffolding, stones crushed fingers, saws cut hands. Most injuries were minor, some were serious. A few men died during the 5 years of construction. Their names were never recorded, they were just laborers, replaceable. The work continued regardless of casualties. They started with the foundation. The soil had to be excavated down to bedrock in some areas. The hilltop looked solid, but the soil varied. Some areas had clay, others had sand. Rock appeared at different depths. Engineers surveyed carefully. They determined where bedrock was closest to the surface. That became the location for load-bearing walls. Teams of men with shovels and wheelbarrows removed thousands of tons of earth. Horse-drawn carts hauled the dirt away. The excavation took 3 months. By winter 1914, you could see the outline of the building in the bare earth. A massive rectangle, 340 feet long, 80 feet wide. The foundation would support a structure weighing thousands of tons. It had to be engineered perfectly. Concrete was poured in massive quantities. The concrete arrived mixed in trucks. It was poured into wooden forms that shaped the foundation walls. Workers used long poles to vibrate the concrete and remove air bubbles. The work was exhausting. Concrete is heavy. Moving it into position required constant physical effort. Tons of steel reinforcement were embedded in the concrete. Steel rods were tied together in grids. The grids were placed in the forms before concrete was poured. The steel would prevent the concrete from cracking under load. This was modern construction technique. Without steel reinforcement, the weight of the building would eventually crack the foundation. The steel distributed forces evenly, made the foundation essentially indestructible. The foundation work alone took 6 months. By spring 1915, the foundation was complete, solid, level, ready to support limestone walls. Then the limestone began arriving, Indiana limestone, the same material used decades later for the Empire State Building and countless other major structures. Limestone was ideal for this type of construction. It was beautiful, pale cream color that almost glowed in sunlight. It was workable. Stonemasons could carve it with hand tools, shape it precisely, create intricate details. But it was also incredibly durable. It would survive for centuries without significant weathering. The limestone came from quarries near Bedford, Indiana. The stone was cut from the earth in massive blocks. Some blocks weighed over 2,000 pounds. They were rough cut at the quarry to approximately the right dimensions. Then, they were loaded onto railroad cars. The journey from Indiana to Long Island took 5 days by rail. Multiple trains delivered limestone continuously throughout 1915 and 1916. Hundreds of tons arrived every week. At Cold Spring Harbor Station, the blocks were unloaded onto wagons. Teams of horses pulled the wagons up the hill to the construction site. The road was steep. 4 horses were needed to pull a wagon loaded with stone. The horses strained against the weight. Their muscles bulged. Drivers used whips to keep them moving. It was brutal work for both animals and men. On site, workers unloaded the limestone blocks. This required careful coordination. A block weighing 2,000 pounds could crush a man if it shifted unexpectedly. Wooden ramps were built. The blocks were rolled down the ramps on logs used as rollers. Teams of men guided each block, shouted warnings, moved in synchronized effort. Once unloaded, the blocks were moved to the stonemason's workshop. The stonemasons were artists. They examined each block carefully, looked for flaws, cracks, discoloration. Imperfect stone was rejected, sent back to the quarry. Only perfect limestone was acceptable for OHEKA. The masons worked with hand tools, chisels, hammers, measuring devices. They shaped each block to exact specifications. The architects had provided detailed drawings. Every stone had a specific place, a specific size, a specific shape. The masons cut each block to match those specifications precisely. The work required skill developed over years. A mason learned his trade through apprenticeship. He started young, spent years learning how to read stone, how to cut without breaking, how to achieve smooth surfaces, how to carve decorative elements. By the time a man was a master mason, he had spent 20 years perfecting his craft. These men were expensive. They earned $3 per day. That was 6 times what common laborers earned. But their skill justified the cost. A master mason could shape a complex carved element in a day. An amateur would ruin the stone trying. The shaped blocks were lifted into place by derricks, tall wooden structures with pulleys and cables. A steam engine provided power. The cable wrapped around a drum. As the drum turned, the cable pulled blocks upward. Workers guided the blocks into position. Masons checked alignment with levels and plumb lines. If a block was not perfectly positioned, it was lowered and adjusted. This process repeated hundreds of times daily. Slowly, the walls rose. The limestone was set in mortar, a mixture of sand, lime, and water. The mortar had to be the right consistency. Too wet and it would not support the stone. Too dry and it would not bond properly. Masons mixed it by hand. They judged consistency by feel. This was knowledge that could not be written down. It had to be learned through experience. The mortar joints between stones were carefully pointed. The mason would pack mortar into the joint, then tool it smooth. The joint had to be weather-tight. Water could not penetrate. If water got into the joint and froze, it would crack the mortar, eventually damage the stone. Proper pointing prevented this. The work was slow. A crew of 20 masons might set 50 blocks in a day. That sounds like progress. But the building required thousands of blocks. Some walls were 3 feet thick, multiple layers of limestone. The facade alone required over 10,000 individual stones. The work continued through 1915 and into 1916. The walls climbed. First floor, second floor, third floor. The scale became apparent as the walls climbed higher. The house was enormous, 340 feet long. That was longer than a football field. 5 stories of limestone rising on the hilltop. The scale became apparent as the walls climbed. The house was enormous, 340 feet long. That was longer than a football field. 5 stories of limestone rising on the hilltop. You could see it from miles away. Ships on Long Island Sound used it as a landmark. Trains passing through Cold Spring Harbor had passengers pointing at the massive structure, taking shape on the hill. Local newspapers covered the construction. Stories appeared about the size and cost. People speculated about who would live there, what parties would be held there, whether it would rival the Vanderbilt estates in Newport. The speculation was endless. Otto ignored all of it. He focused on details. He visited the site regularly. He reviewed every aspect of construction, the placement of windows, the design of moldings, the slope of roof angles. He insisted on perfection. If something was not right, it was torn out and rebuilt. Cost was irrelevant. Quality was everything. The interior required as much work as the exterior. The steel frame was clad with brick and plaster. Walls were thick. Sound could not travel between rooms. Privacy was absolute. The floor plan followed French palace principles. The ground floor had public spaces: entrance hall, reception rooms, ballroom, dining room, library, music room. These were the rooms where guests would be entertained. They had to be spectacular. The ceilings were 20 feet high. Ornamental plaster covered every surface. Some ceilings were coffered. Others had elaborate moldings and medallions. A few would receive gilding. The walls were paneled in carved wood or covered in silk fabric. Every detail was considered. Every element was custom-made. Nothing came from catalogs. Everything was designed specifically for OHEKA. The ballroom was the crown jewel. It occupied the entire center section of the ground floor. It was 60 feet long and 40 feet wide. The ceiling soared to 30 feet. Crystal chandeliers would hang from that ceiling. Each chandelier weighed hundreds of pounds and contained thousands of individual crystal pieces. The floor was parquet. Intricate geometric patterns made from multiple types of wood. When finished and polished, it would gleam like glass. The second floor held the family quarters: Otto's bedroom suite, Addie's separate suite, children's rooms. Each had its own bathroom. This was still unusual in 1914. Most houses had shared bathrooms. OHEKA would have 39 bathrooms, one for nearly every bedroom. The bathrooms were marble, Carrara marble imported from Italy, white with gray veining. The fixtures were the finest available. Nothing was standard. Third and fourth floors had guest bedrooms. 32 bedrooms total throughout the house. Each had unique decoration, different color schemes, different fabrics, different furniture. No two rooms were identical. A guest could visit OHEKA dozens of times and stay in a different room each visit. The attic level and basement held service areas, servant bedrooms, storage, mechanical systems, the power plant, the heating system, laundry facilities, kitchens, pantries. All the infrastructure needed to run a 127-room palace. These areas were functional, not decorative. But even here, the construction was solid, permanent, built to last. Outside, the grounds were being transformed. The Olmsted Brothers landscape architecture firm was hired. They were the sons of Frederick Law Olmsted, who had designed Central Park. They knew how to create grand landscapes. They started by clearing and grading. The natural hilltop was beautiful but wild. It needed to be tamed. Trees were removed where they blocked views or interfered with the building. Others were preserved and incorporated into the design. The soil was prepared. Tons of topsoil were brought in. Fertilizers were added. Drainage systems were installed. You could not have formal gardens without proper drainage. Water had to move away from plants in controlled ways. The garden design was geometric. Straight paths, right angles, symmetry. This was French formal garden style. Nature controlled by human design. Hedges were planted in patterns. They would take years to grow to the proper height and thickness. But once mature, gardeners would trim them into precise shapes, rectangles, circles, curves. The hedges would create walls and rooms within the garden. You could walk through the gardens and feel enclosed even though you were outside. Reflecting pools were excavated and lined. Fountains were installed. Water would be pumped from underground wells. The fountains would operate all summer. Statuary was commissioned, classical figures, marble and bronze. Each piece cost thousands of dollars. They were placed at focal points throughout the gardens. You would walk along a path, turn a corner, and encounter a statue. It created moments of discovery. The cost kept escalating. By 1917, 3 years into construction, Otto had already spent $8 million. The house was not finished. The war had driven up costs for everything. Steel prices doubled, lumber prices tripled. Labor costs were rising as workers demanded higher wages to offset inflation. Otto's banking partners at Kuhn, Loeb were concerned. They questioned whether finishing OHEKA made sense. Perhaps he should stop construction, sell what was built, cut his losses. Otto refused. He had started this project to create something permanent, something beautiful. Stopping halfway would leave nothing but an expensive ruin. He would finish it properly. He increased the budget again. Construction continued through 1918. The war ended in November 1918. Materials became available again. Labor costs stabilized. The final push began. Interior decoration accelerated. Furniture was being custom-made. Fabrics were being woven. Carpets were being designed and produced. Paintings were being commissioned for specific walls. Everything was coordinated. Every room had to work as part of a unified whole. Finally, in 1919, OHEKA was completed. 5 years of construction. $11 million spent. The largest private residence ever built on Long Island. The second largest in America after Biltmore. Otto held a reception to celebrate. 200 guests attended. They arrived in the evening. Carriages and early automobiles came up the long driveway. The house was lit from inside. Every window glowed. The limestone facade gleamed in the artificial light. Guests entered through the main entrance. They walked into the great hall. Gasps were audible. The space was overwhelming. The ceiling soared above them. Chandeliers sparkled. The marble floor reflected light like water. Servants moved through the rooms with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. An orchestra played in the ballroom. Guests explored the house. They wandered through the public rooms. They admired the art, the furniture, the details everywhere. They walked through the gardens. Lanterns had been hung throughout. The reflecting pools mirrored the stars above. The fountains were running. The sound of water was constant. It was magical. Guests stayed past midnight. Some stayed until dawn. They danced in the ballroom. They sat in the library discussing art and music and politics. They ate dinner in the dining room at a table that seated 40 people. They stood on the terrace looking out over Long Island Sound. They agreed this was the finest estate in America. Otto had succeeded. He had created his monument, but the cost had been extreme. $11 million was gone. Otto was still wealthy. His stake in Kuhn, Loeb, was worth millions, but he had committed his fortune to this project and to his cultural philanthropy. He was no longer building wealth, he was spending it. This would have been fine if his income had remained high, but the world was changing. The 1920s would be prosperous, but they would also bring changes to banking that would reduce profits. Competition was increasing. Interest rates were falling. The easy money of the railroad boom era was ending. Otto's income from Kuhn, Loeb would decline. Not disappear, but decline. Yet his expenses remained constant. OHEKA required $200,000 annually to operate. His Fifth Avenue mansion required another $100,000. His art collecting continued. His cultural philanthropy increased. By the mid-1920s, Otto was spending more than he earned. He was drawing down his capital. His fortune was shrinking. His partners at Kuhn, Loeb urged him to cut spending, sell OHEKA, stop giving money away. Otto refused. He believed wealthy men had obligations beyond making money. He would maintain his support of the arts. He would keep OHEKA. His fortune would last, except it would not last. The 1920s at OHEKA were glorious. Otto and Addie entertained constantly. Weekend house parties with 30 or 40 guests, formal dinners with 60 people, garden parties with 200, celebrities attended, Broadway stars, opera singers, conductors, composers, politicians, business leaders, foreign dignitaries. Anyone important who visited New York eventually visited OHEKA. The 1920s at OHEKA were glorious. Otto and Addie entertained constantly. Weekend house parties with 30 or 40 guests were common. Formal dinners with 60 people happened monthly. Garden parties with 200 guests occurred several times each summer. The estate became known as one of Long Island's great social centers. Getting invited to OHEKA meant you mattered. Celebrities attended regularly. Charlie Chaplin visited multiple times. He was filming in New York. Otto hosted dinners for him, introduced him to wealthy potential investors. Chaplin was charming, funny even off-screen. He could mimic anyone, do physical comedy spontaneously. After dinner, he would entertain guests with impromptu performances. Nobody who saw him at OHEKA forgot it. George Gershwin performed there. He was young then, still establishing his reputation. Otto supported him financially, helped produce his early shows. Gershwin would sit at OHEKA's grand piano, play for hours, improvise, try out new compositions, ask Otto's opinion. The Rhapsody in Blue was partially developed during visits to OHEKA. Gershwin played sections. Otto offered thoughts, suggested changes. He had good musical instincts. Gershwin trusted his judgment. Cole Porter attended parties at OHEKA, so did Irving Berlin, Jerome Kern. The greatest American composers of the era gathered there. They talked about music, about shows, about the business of Broadway. They made deals, formed partnerships, created collaborations. Much of the American musical theater was essentially born at OHEKA's dinner parties. The weekend parties followed a predictable pattern. Guests arrived Friday evening, usually by automobile. Long Island was still rural enough that the drive from Manhattan took 2 hours. The roads were narrow, often unpaved. Automobiles broke down frequently. Guests sometimes arrived late, covered in road dust. Mechanical problems were expected. When guests did arrive, servants met them at the entrance. Footmen carried luggage. Maids showed guests to their rooms. Each guest was assigned a bedroom. The room assignment mattered. Important guests got the best rooms. Large suites with sitting areas, views over the gardens, private bathrooms. Less important guests got smaller rooms, shared bathrooms. This was how Otto subtly communicated status. Everyone noticed where they were placed. Dinner was served at 8. Formal dress was required. Men wore black tie, tuxedos, white dress shirts, black bow ties, patent leather shoes. Women wore evening gowns, long dresses, silk, satin, elaborate embroidery, low necklines, bare shoulders. The dresses alone cost thousands of dollars. Then there were jewels. Diamonds were essential, necklaces, bracelets, earrings. The wealthy women wore fortunes around their necks. Some pieces were family heirlooms, others were recent purchases. Either way, the display was intentional. Showing wealth was part of the evening's purpose. The dining room could seat 40 people at one table. The table was custom-made, solid mahogany, 40 feet long. It required a dozen servants just to set it properly. Each place setting had multiple plates, multiple glasses, multiple sets of silverware. Formal dinners had 6 or 7 courses. Each course required different utensils. The placement of each fork and knife and spoon mattered. Mistakes suggested you did not belong. The meal began with oysters. Long Island oysters, fresh from local waters, served raw on beds of ice. Each guest received a dozen. Champagne was poured. French champagne, the best available. Dom Perignon, Moet. Otto kept extensive wine cellars at OHEKA, thousands of bottles. He selected wines personally, spent enormous amounts building his collection. The second course was soup, usually clear consommé. Served hot in shallow bowls. Guests used special soup spoons. The technique for eating soup properly was specific: spoon away from yourself, sip from the side of the spoon. Never blow on hot soup. These were rules everyone at the table knew. Breaking them marked you as unsophisticated. The fish course came next: sole, or bass, or salmon, prepared simply, often just butter and herbs. The quality of the fish mattered more than elaborate preparation. Served with white wine, usually a French Chablis or German Riesling. Then a palate cleanser, sorbet, lemon usually, to prepare the mouth for the main course. The meat course was substantial, beef, or lamb, or game birds, roasted, served with elaborate sauces, accompanied by vegetables, potatoes. The presentation was careful. Everything arranged artistically on the plate, served with red wine. French Bordeaux usually, sometimes Burgundy. The cheese course followed, a selection of French cheeses, served with fruit. With the cheese, port was poured, Portuguese port aged for decades. This was when serious conversation happened. The meal was slowing down. Guests were relaxed from wine. The atmosphere loosened slightly. Finally, dessert. Something elaborate, cakes, pastries, fruit arrangements, served with coffee or brandy. By now, guests had been at the table for 3 hours. The meal was a performance, an exhibition of wealth and taste. Everything from the food to the service to the conversation was carefully orchestrated. After dinner, entertainment, sometimes professional performers, opera singers giving recitals. Otto would arrange this. A soprano from the Met would perform, accompanied by piano. She would sing arias from Italian operas, Puccini, Verdi. The guests would sit in the music room listening, appreciating the artistry. Sometimes there were piano virtuosos, concert pianists performing Chopin or Liszt, sometimes chamber music groups, string quartets performing Beethoven or Mozart. But often the entertainment was informal. Guests entertained each other. Someone would sit at the piano and play. Others would sing, not professionally, just for fun. These were sophisticated people. Most had some musical training. They could read music, play instruments adequately, sing in tune. Impromptu performances were common. Conversations would continue late into the night. Guests sat in the library or in the drawing rooms. They talked about everything: politics, art, business, literature, music. These were not casual conversations. These were people at the top of their fields discussing important subjects. Business deals were made. A banker would meet an industrialist. They would discuss financing. By the end of the weekend, an agreement would be reached. Millions of dollars in deals originated at OHEKA dinner parties. Artistic collaborations formed. A composer would meet a lyricist. They would discover they worked well together. A partnership would begin. Shows would be written. Careers would be made. Romantic relationships started. Young people would meet. They would walk in the gardens, talk under the stars. By the end of summer, engagements would be announced. Weddings would be planned. OHEKA was where important things happened, where connections were made, where the future was shaped. Saturday morning was leisurely. Breakfast was served whenever guests appeared. No set time, no schedule. The dining room had a buffet: eggs, bacon, sausages, toast, fruit, coffee. Guests came down when they woke up, ate casually, then dispersed to activities. Saturday evening was the peak. Another formal dinner, dancing in the ballroom. The orchestra would play until 3 in the morning. Couples would dance. Singles would flirt. Business deals would be discussed. Alliances would be formed. OHEKA was where things happened, where careers were made, where relationships began. Sunday was departure day. Late breakfast. Guests left by early afternoon. Back to reality, back to New York. Returning to the world outside OHEKA's gates. But maintaining this required constant money. The servants alone cost $100,000 yearly. OHEKA had 60 full-time staff, a butler, multiple footmen, housemaids, cooks, kitchen assistants, laundry staff, gardeners, chauffeurs, maintenance workers. Each received salary, plus room and board. Managing the staff was complex. They had their own hierarchy, their own social structure. The butler managed the house staff. The head gardener managed ground staff. They reported to Otto's estate manager, who handled the overall operation. The property taxes were $50,000 annually. The heating system burned tons of coal every winter. The cost was staggering. The power plant required constant maintenance and fuel. The insurance was expensive. A property worth $11 million required substantial coverage. Otto paid all of this without complaint. OHEKA was his statement, his legacy. The cost did not matter. Except it did matter, because his fortune was finite. By 1925, Otto had spent down a significant portion of his wealth. His capital was perhaps $5 million. That sounds like plenty. But at his current spending rate, it would be gone in 20 years. Otto was 60 years old. He would likely live another 20 years. The mathematics were concerning. Yet Otto changed nothing. His spending continued. OHEKA's expenses continued. His cultural philanthropy continued. He was locked into a lifestyle that would eventually consume everything. Then in October 1929, the stock market crashed. The crash came suddenly. Thursday, October 24th, Black Thursday. Stock prices fell sharply at opening. Panic selling began. Brokers could not keep up with sell orders. The ticker tape fell behind. By noon, nobody knew what stocks were worth. Prices were changing faster than information could travel. Major banks tried to stabilize the market. They pooled money, sent representatives to the exchange floor, started buying stocks to support prices. It worked briefly. Prices stabilized. The market closed down only slightly. Everyone hoped the worst was over. They were wrong. The following Tuesday, October 29th, was worse. Black Tuesday. The market collapsed. 16 million shares traded. That was a record. Far more than the exchange could handle. Prices fell without limit. Stocks that had been worth $100 per share fell to 50, then 20, then 10. Fortunes disappeared in hours. By the closing bell, the market had lost $14 billion in value. That was more than the entire federal budget. It was catastrophic. The crash continued. Wednesday, the market fell again. Thursday, it fell again. By mid-November, stocks had lost half their value, but the decline continued through 1930, through 1931, through 1932. By the summer of 1932, stocks had lost 90% of their peak value. A share of General Electric that sold for $400 in 1929 traded for $20 in 1932. U.S. Steel fell from $200 to $20. Radio Corporation of America fell from $100 to $3. Every major stock collapsed. Wealth that existed in 1929 simply vanished. For men like Otto, the crash was catastrophic. His wealth was invested primarily in stocks and bonds. His personal portfolio lost 90% of its value. His stake in Kuhn, Loeb lost most of its value. The firm was still operating, but business had collapsed. Nobody was issuing corporate bonds. Nobody was financing railroad construction. The entire investment banking industry was paralyzed. Otto's income from Kuhn, Loeb fell from $3 million annually to perhaps $300,000. That sounds like plenty. But his expenses remained constant. OHEKA cost $200,000 yearly. The Fifth Avenue mansion cost $100,000. His cultural philanthropy continued. He had made commitments. Institutions depended on his money. He could not simply stop giving. The Metropolitan Opera needed $100,000 annually. Multiple Broadway productions depended on his financing. Artists relied on his support. He had created this web of obligations. Now he was trapped by it. Between 1929 and 1932, Otto spent down most of his remaining capital. He sold stocks at terrible prices, trying to raise cash to cover expenses. Each sale locked in losses. Stocks that he sold for $10 per share would eventually recover to $50 or $100. But he needed money immediately. He could not wait for recovery. He borrowed against his life insurance. The policies had cash value. He could borrow up to that value. He took out several $100,000 in loans. Using his insurance as collateral, he borrowed from banks. Using his Fifth Avenue mansion as collateral, he took out a $300,000 mortgage at 62 years old. Most men his age owned their homes free and clear. Otto was going deeper into debt. His partners at Kuhn, Loeb were horrified. They watched him destroy himself financially. They tried to intervene. They urged him to sell OHEKA immediately, before the real estate market collapsed completely. In 1930, he could have gotten $2 million, enough to stabilize his finances, pay off debts, live comfortably on what remained. Otto refused. OHEKA was not for sale. It was his creation, his monument. He would not abandon it because of temporary financial difficulties. He believed the economy would recover, stock prices would rebound, his wealth would return. He just needed to survive until then. But the economy did not recover. The depression deepened. By 1931, unemployment reached 15%. Banks were failing. Hundreds of banks closed. Depositors lost their savings. Businesses failed. Factory production fell by half. Agricultural prices collapsed. Farmers could not sell crops for enough to cover costs. Mortgages went unpaid. Foreclosures multiplied. The entire economic system was failing, and it kept getting worse. By 1932, unemployment reached 25%. 1 in 4 workers had no job. Breadlines formed in every city. Shanty towns appeared. Homeless people built shelters from scrap materials. These settlements were called Hoovervilles, named mockingly after President Hoover, who seemed unable to stop the collapse. The suffering was immense, and it continued through 1933. Through 1934, no recovery appeared. Otto's situation became desperate. By 1933, his liquid assets were gone. His stock portfolio had been sold. His insurance loans were maxed out. His bank loans were at their limits. His only remaining assets were OHEKA and the Fifth Avenue mansion. Both were mortgaged. Both had unpaid property taxes. He was running out of options. His income from Kuhn, Loeb had fallen to almost nothing. The firm was barely operating. The banking business had essentially stopped. Nobody was borrowing money. Nobody was issuing bonds. The few transactions that happened generated tiny fees. Otto's share was perhaps $50,000 annually. That was not enough. OHEKA alone cost $200,000 yearly. He could not cut expenses significantly. The property taxes were fixed. The heating costs were fixed. The minimum staffing was fixed. He could not shut down OHEKA. It would deteriorate. The building would be damaged. Everything he had spent $11 million creating would be lost. But he could not afford to maintain it either. He was trapped, caught between impossible choices. His health began to fail. The stress was destroying him. He was 66 years old. He had spent 40 years building his fortune. He had spent it creating beauty, supporting art, building monuments. Now everything was collapsing. His legacy was threatened. His creation was at risk. The institutions he supported were closing. The Metropolitan Opera was on the edge of bankruptcy. Broadway theaters were dark. Artists were starving. The entire cultural infrastructure he had helped build was disintegrating, and he could not save it. His money was gone. His credit was exhausted. He had nothing left to give. So Otto continued spending. He drew down his capital. He sold assets. He borrowed against his life insurance. He did everything except change his lifestyle. His partners at Kuhn, Loeb were horrified. They watched him destroy himself financially. They tried to intervene. They urged him to sell OHEKA immediately. Before the real estate market collapsed completely, he could get perhaps $2 million, enough to stabilize his finances. Otto refused. OHEKA was not for sale. Between 1929 and 1934, Otto spent his remaining fortune. The exact amounts are not known. But by early 1934, he was essentially broke. His estate consisted primarily of OHEKA, which was unsellable, and his art collection, which was also unsellable. His liquid assets were gone. He owed money to multiple creditors. His income from Kuhn Low barely covered his basic living expenses. OHEKA's operating costs were unpayable. The property taxes were unpaid. The staff had been reduced, but not eliminated. The house was beginning to deteriorate from lack of maintenance. Otto was 70 years old. He had spent his entire fortune creating beauty, supporting art, building a monument. Now he had nothing. The monument was about to be taken from him. On March 29, 1934, Otto Kahn died of a heart attack at his Fifth Avenue mansion. He was 67 years old. The obituaries were extensive. They praised his cultural philanthropy, his support of opera and theater, his art collecting. They mentioned OHEKA briefly. Few people outside Long Island knew much about it. The house had become Otto's private retreat, less relevant as his finances collapsed. His will was filed for probate. The assets were listed: OHEKA, the Fifth Avenue mansion, the art collection, various personal property. The debts were also listed: several $100,000 owed to banks and private creditors. The estate was insolvent. After paying debts and taxes, there was almost nothing left for his heirs. Addie inherited OHEKA. She also inherited its debts and expenses. She was 60 years old. She had no income beyond what Otto's life insurance provided. That was perhaps $50,000 annually. OHEKA cost $200,000 annually to maintain. The mathematics were impossible. Addie made her decision quickly. She would not keep OHEKA. She could not afford it. She did not even particularly like it. She had always preferred the Fifth Avenue house. OHEKA had been Otto's dream, not hers. She would sell it, use whatever money she got to pay debts, and support herself. She contacted real estate agents. She listed the property. The asking price was $3 million. Nobody offered anything close to that. The Depression had destroyed the luxury real estate market. Nobody was buying mansions. Nobody could afford to operate them even if they were free. Addie waited a year. No offers. She reduced the price to $2 million. Still no offers. She reduced it to $1 million. A few inquiries, but no serious buyers. Everyone who looked at OHEKA saw the same problem. The operating costs were impossible. The property taxes alone exceeded most people's annual income. By 1936, Addie was desperate. She could not pay the property taxes. The county was threatening to seize OHEKA for tax arrears. She contacted the state of New York. Would they take it as a park? A museum? A public facility? The state was not interested. They had no budget for maintaining properties during the Depression. She contacted Nassau County. Same answer. No interest, no budget. She even contacted the federal government. Would they use it for something? An embassy? A hospital? No interest. OHEKA was too expensive for governments to operate. Finally, in 1938, Addie accepted an offer. A merchant marine academy offered to lease OHEKA with an option to purchase. The lease payments would cover property taxes. If they exercised the purchase option, she would receive $300,000. Far less than the property was worth, but better than losing it to tax foreclosure. The academy moved in. They converted bedrooms into dormitories. They used the ballroom as a lecture hall. They operated briefly. But by 1940, enrollment was declining. The academy was losing money. They could not afford the lease payments. They abandoned the property. OHEKA was empty again. Between 1940 and 1948, OHEKA was essentially abandoned. Addie died in 1949, but she had given up on the property years earlier. It reverted to the Kahn estate. Nobody wanted responsibility. Local authorities considered it a problem. The property taxes remained unpaid. The building was deteriorating. Vandals had discovered it. They broke windows. They stripped copper pipes and wiring for scrap value. They tore out fixtures and sold them. They destroyed what they could not steal. Homeless people sheltered there in winter. They burned furniture for heat. They damaged walls and floors. The roof began to leak. Rain poured into upper floor rooms. Ceilings collapsed. Plaster fell. Mold spread through damp areas. The grand staircase was damaged. The ballroom floor was scratched and stained. The crystal chandeliers were mostly intact, but some had been vandalized. The gardens were completely wild. 23 acres of formal plantings had returned to nature. Hedges were overgrown. Paths were invisible under weeds. Statues were toppled. Reflecting pools were filled with leaves and debris. The fountains had not operated in years. Pipes were frozen and cracked. The property looked like a ruin, like something abandoned for decades, not like something that had been magnificent 15 years earlier. In 1948, the real estate agent was hired to dispose of OHEKA. The instructions were simple: get whatever you can. Give it away if necessary. Just get it off the estate's books. Stop the accumulating property tax debt. The agent tried everything. He advertised in newspapers. He contacted wealthy individuals. He reached out to institutions. He offered it to universities, to hospitals, to charitable organizations. Everyone saw the same problem. The operating costs made OHEKA worthless. The building itself was beautiful. But it was a liability, an expensive permanent burden that would consume money forever. The final listing was published in August 1948. OHEKA Castle, $1. The only condition was the buyer had to maintain it. Even at that price, there were no takers. OHEKA had nearly disappeared. The first time. The property remained vacant until 1948, when Eastern Military Academy finally purchased it for $75,000. The academy was a private military school for boys. They needed facilities. OHEKA was enormous and cheap. They could convert it into dormitories and classrooms. The purchase saved OHEKA from demolition, but the academy's ownership would prove problematic. They could not afford proper maintenance. They did minimal repairs. They subdivided rooms to create more dormitories. They covered original finishes with paint and cheap materials. They treated the building as a utilitarian structure, not as art. The ballroom became a gymnasium. The walls were damaged by sports equipment. The floor was covered with rubber matting. The chandeliers were removed and sold. The library became classrooms. The shelves were removed. Desks were installed. Original paneling was painted over. The gardens remained wild. The academy had no budget for landscaping. The formal gardens were lost. Trees and shrubs grew unchecked. The reflecting pools filled with dirt and became ponds. The statues were stolen or buried under vegetation. By 1960, you could not tell formal gardens had ever existed there. The academy operated OHEKA for 30 years. They enrolled several hundred students. They generated enough revenue to cover basic expenses. But they were always financially stressed. Tuition was not high enough. Costs kept rising. They could not maintain the building properly. By the late 1970s, the academy was failing. Enrollment was declining. Parents were choosing other schools. Revenue was falling. The building's condition was deteriorating visibly. Plaster was falling from ceilings. Windows were broken and not repaired. The heating system was failing. Winter temperatures inside the building dropped to 40 degrees in some rooms. The academy announced in 1977 that it would close. The students would be transferred to other schools. OHEKA would be sold. But who would buy it? The property in 1977 was in terrible condition. 60 years of neglect had taken their toll. The roof was leaking in multiple locations. The limestone facade had cracks. Water had infiltrated the walls. Some interior walls were structurally unsound. The electrical system was obsolete and dangerous. The plumbing was failing. The heating system was beyond repair. Fixing all of this would cost millions. Nobody wanted to invest in repairing a white elephant. Real estate developers looked at the property. They were not interested in the building. They wanted the land. 400 acres near Cold Spring Harbor was valuable. It could be subdivided into building lots. Dozens of houses could be built. That was the only economically viable use. The developers filed applications to demolish OHEKA. The demolition permits were approved. The building was scheduled to be torn down in 1978. This was the second time OHEKA nearly disappeared. This time, preservationists intervened. OHEKA was one of the largest and most significant mansions on Long Island. The Gilded Age estates were disappearing rapidly. Most had been demolished in the 1950s and 1960s. OHEKA was one of the few that remained. If it was demolished, an irreplaceable piece of architectural history would be lost. The Society for the Preservation of Long Island Antiquities filed legal challenges. They argued OHEKA was historically significant. It should be landmarked, protected from demolition. The developers fought back. They argued the building was too far gone. Restoration would cost $10 million or more. Nobody would invest that. The property should be allowed to be redeveloped. The legal battle lasted a year. During that time, OHEKA remained vacant. Vandals continued damaging it. The deterioration accelerated. Parts of the roof collapsed. Rain poured into the attic and upper floors. Ceilings fell in multiple rooms. The grand staircase was damaged when part of the ceiling above it collapsed. The situation was desperate. Either someone would rescue OHEKA immediately, or it would be demolished. In 1979, Nassau County agreed to purchase OHEKA for $1. The county would take over the property. They would prevent demolition. They would stabilize the building. Eventually, they might find a use for it. The preservationists celebrated. OHEKA was saved, except it was not saved. Nassau County had no plan, no budget, no idea what to do with a deteriorating 127-room mansion. The county took ownership but did nothing. The building continued to decay. For 5 more years, OHEKA sat empty. The county blocked demolition, but they did not repair anything, did not secure the building, did not even board up the windows. Vandals continued entering. They stripped whatever remained valuable. They spray-painted graffiti on walls. They destroyed whatever they could reach. By 1984, OHEKA was on the verge of collapse. The roof was failing. Water infiltration had compromised structural elements. Some floors were sagging. The building was physically unsafe. Engineers who inspected it recommended demolition. The structure was beyond saving. The repair costs would exceed $20 million. Nassau County agreed. They would demolish OHEKA. They would sell the land to developers. At least they could recoup something from the property. Demolition was scheduled for late 1984. This was the 3rd time OHEKA nearly disappeared. This time, it looked final. Then Gary Melius appeared. He was a Long Island developer. 40 years old, he had made money building retail properties and small office buildings. He was not wealthy by Manhattan standards, but he had a few $1 million. He had heard about OHEKA. He drove out to look at it. He walked through the ruins. He saw what everyone else saw: a disaster, a wreck, a building that should be demolished. But he also saw something else. He saw possibility. OHEKA's bones were still good. The limestone facade could be cleaned. The steel frame was sound. The basic structure could be saved. Yes, the interior was destroyed, but interiors could be rebuilt. He could create something extraordinary, a luxury hotel. Long Island had no 5-star hotels. Wealthy people visited the area for weddings and events. They stayed in ordinary hotels. What if OHEKA became the ultimate venue? A palace hotel, something unique, something that could charge premium prices. The economics might work if he could buy it cheap enough, if he could control the restoration costs, if he could finance it properly. It was risky, It might bankrupt him. But the opportunity was extraordinary. Gary contacted Nassau County. He offered to purchase OHEKA. His offer was $1 million. The county was skeptical. What would he do with it? Gary explained his hotel plan. The county was interested. They wanted OHEKA off their books. They wanted the property tax revenue that an operating business would generate. They negotiated. In 1984, Gary Melius purchased OHEKA from Nassau County for $1.5 million. He also assumed responsibility for back property taxes. The total acquisition cost was about $2 million. Now he had to restore it. The initial estimate was $10 million. Gary knew that was optimistic. Buildings like OHEKA always cost more than estimated. The damage was worse than anyone realized. Every system needed replacement. Every surface needed repair. It would be enormously expensive, but Gary had committed. He would restore OHEKA properly, or bankrupt himself trying. Gary began raising money. He needed investors, people who believed OHEKA could become profitable. He prepared presentations, financial projections, market analysis. He explained the hotel concept. Long Island needed luxury accommodations. Wealthy people visited for weddings, corporate events. They stayed in ordinary hotels. What if OHEKA became the premier venue? The only true palace hotel in the region. It could charge premium rates, attract international clientele, become profitable. Some investors were intrigued. They had money to invest. Real estate development was booming in the 1980s, but OHEKA was risky. Most investors passed. A few agreed. Gary assembled about $8 million in financing. Some came from investors taking equity stakes. Some came from bank loans secured by his other properties. Some came from his own capital. He was betting everything on OHEKA. If it failed, he would lose everything. The restoration began in 1985. The first task was stabilization. Stop the deterioration before it became irreversible. The building had been open to weather for years. Rain had poured through the broken roof. Water had infiltrated everywhere. The damage was extensive. Some floor joists were rotted. Some ceiling beams were damaged. The plaster was destroyed. Much of it had already fallen. What remained was unstable. The first step was securing the building. Workers boarded up broken windows. This stopped rain from entering. Temporary roofing was installed over the worst sections. Tarps covered damaged areas. The goal was to dry out the building. Dehumidifiers were brought in. Industrial fans ran constantly. The moisture had to be removed before mold could be controlled. Some areas had extensive mold growth, black mold covering entire walls. This had to be remediated. Workers in protective gear removed contaminated materials, sealed them in bags, disposed of them properly. The affected areas were treated with antimicrobial solutions, then sealed. The health risks were serious. Mold spores cause respiratory problems. Workers had to be protected. The remediation alone cost $200,000. Once the building was secured and dried, real work could begin. The roof was the priority. Without a sound roof, nothing else mattered. The existing roof was beyond repair. 60 years of neglect had destroyed it. Slate tiles were broken. The underlayment was rotted. The flashing was corroded. Water had penetrated everywhere. The entire roof needed replacement. This was an enormous job. The roof covered 40,000 square feet. The pitch was steep. Workers would be working at dangerous heights. The old roof had to be completely removed. This meant stripping off thousands of slate tiles. Each tile weighed several pounds. They had to be removed carefully. Some were salvageable. Most were broken. They were loaded into dump trucks and hauled away, tons of old roofing material. Underneath the slate was wooden decking. Much of it was rotted. The rotted sections were cut out and replaced. New plywood sheathing was installed. This provided a solid surface for the new roof. Then a waterproof membrane was applied. This was modern roofing technology, a synthetic rubber membrane that would last 50 years, far better than the tar paper used in the original construction. Finally, new slate tiles were installed. But slate was expensive. Premium natural slate cost $30 per square foot. The roof would cost $1.2 million just for materials. Gary tried to find cheaper alternatives: synthetic slate, architectural shingles, anything that looked right but cost less. The preservationists objected. OHEKA deserved real slate. Anything else would be wrong. Gary reluctantly agreed. Real slate it would be. The slate was quarried in Vermont, shipped to Long Island by truck. Each tile was hand-placed by skilled roofers. The work was slow, dangerous. Several workers were injured in falls. One man broke his leg when he slipped on the steep pitch. The project was delayed while safety procedures were improved. The roof took 8 months to complete. The cost exceeded $1.5 million. But when finished, OHEKA had a roof that would last a century. The building was finally protected from weather. Next came the mechanical systems. Everything electrical had to be replaced. The original wiring was cloth-covered wire. 70 years old. Dangerous. It all had to be removed. Modern electrical service was designed. The building needed enormous capacity. Guest rooms would have air conditioning, televisions, radios, hair dryers. Modern conveniences required modern electrical systems. A new electrical service was brought in from the street. Transformers were installed. Distribution panels placed throughout the building. Thousands of feet of copper wire were pulled through walls. Outlets and switches installed in every room. Light fixtures hung. The electrical work cost $1.2 million. The heating and cooling system was completely redesigned. The original coal-fired steam system was gone. It could not be repaired. It would not have been efficient anyway. Modern HVAC was required: forced air heating and air conditioning. This required ductwork throughout the building. But the walls were solid limestone. You could not just cut holes for ducts. Every opening had to be carefully planned. Some ducts went through existing chases. Some required new openings to be cut. Contractors used diamond saws to cut through limestone. The work was slow, dusty, loud. Each cut had to be precise. Too large and it would weaken the wall. Too small and the duct would not fit. HVAC contractors worked for 6 months installing ductwork. Then furnaces and air handlers were installed. In the basement, multiple units to handle different zones. The building was divided into climate zones, each controlled independently. Guest wings, public spaces, service areas, each had its own thermostat, its own control. The HVAC system cost $2 million, more than Gary had budgeted, but it was essential. A luxury hotel needs perfect climate control. Guests expect it. Plumbing was equally extensive. All original plumbing was gone, stolen or destroyed. Everything had to be replaced. Water supply lines, drain lines, vent stacks, fixtures. A hotel needs enormous water capacity, 32 guest bathrooms, kitchen facilities, laundry, public restrooms. The water consumption would be massive. New water lines were run from the street, larger capacity than the original, then distribution throughout the building, copper pipes, PVC drains, modern fixtures. Each bathroom needed sinks, toilets, showers or tubs. The fixtures alone cost $300,000. High-quality fixtures, chrome, porcelain, nothing cheap. The plumbing work cost $1.5 million. By this point, Gary had spent $7 million. The building had a new roof, new electrical, new HVAC, new plumbing. But it was still a shell. The interior was gutted. No plaster, no finishes, no decoration. The real expense was about to begin. The limestone facade was cleaned next. Decades of dirt and grime covered the stone. pollution, weather staining, biological growth. The facade looked dark, almost gray. The original cream color was hidden. Professional stone cleaners were hired. They used special techniques, low-pressure water, mild chemical cleaners. The goal was to remove dirt without damaging stone. Limestone is relatively soft. Aggressive cleaning can erode the surface, damage the carved details. The cleaners worked carefully, section by section. Starting at the top, working downward, the water ran black at first, dissolving decades of accumulated grime. Gradually, the original color emerged, pale cream, almost white. The limestone looked new. Then repairs were made to the stone itself. Cracks were found during cleaning, some small, some significant. Each crack had to be evaluated. Small cracks were filled with color-matched mortar. Large cracks required more extensive repair. In some cases, stones had to be replaced. New limestone blocks were carved to match, set in place, the joints carefully pointed. The facade restoration cost $2 million, but when finished, OHEKA looked like it had in 1919. The limestone gleamed. Passers-by on the road below could see it. The palace on the hill was coming back to life. The windows were replaced next, all of them. 127 rooms meant hundreds of windows. The original windows were gone. Wood frames rotted, glass broken. Everything had to be manufactured new, but they had to match the original design. Gary hired specialists, companies that manufactured historical reproduction windows. They studied old photographs, measured the openings, determined the original proportions, then built exact replicas, wood frames, multiple panes, operating hardware. The windows were custom-made, each one fitted to its specific opening. This cost another $1 million, but the result was authentic. OHEKA looked correct. Inside, the ballroom restoration became the showpiece. This room would define OHEKA's identity. It had to be spectacular. The floor was damaged but repairable. Original parquet remained in sections. Where pieces were missing, new wood was milled to match: oak, maple, walnut, fitted together in geometric patterns. The entire floor was sanded smooth. Multiple coats of finish were applied, buffed to a mirror shine. When completed, the floor gleamed. The walls required complete replastering. The original plaster was gone. New plaster was applied in multiple coats: base coat, brown coat, finish coat. Each had to dry properly before the next. The process took months. Then decorative elements were added: crown moldings, picture rails, wainscoting. These had to be recreated from photographs. Wood craftsmen carved new moldings, installed them precisely, matched joints at corners. The ceiling was the challenge. Originally, it had elaborate plaster decoration, coffered sections, molded details. All of that was destroyed. It had to be recreated entirely. Plaster artisans were hired. They studied photographs, drew patterns, created molds, cast decorative elements, installed them on the ceiling. The work required scaffolding throughout the room. Workers balanced on platforms 30 feet above the floor, installing plaster, matching seams, creating smooth transitions. The ceiling work alone took 6 months. Then came the chandelier. The original was long gone. A replacement had to be found. Gary searched for months, finally located a French crystal chandelier from the 1920s. It was the right scale, the right style. He purchased it, had it shipped from France, restored by specialists, then installed in the ballroom. When lit, it cast sparkling light across the entire space. The ballroom restoration cost $1 million, but it was worth it. The room was magnificent. It would be photographed constantly, used in films, featured in magazines. It would define OHEKA's image. Other public spaces received similar treatment: the entrance hall, the grand staircase, the library, the dining room. Each room required custom plaster work, custom woodwork, appropriate furniture and fixtures. Gary was not just repairing OHEKA, he was recreating it as it had been in 1919. Every detail mattered. Every finish had to be correct. He hired historians. They researched original documentation, found photographs, located descriptions, determined what colors had been used, what materials, what styles of furniture. The restoration aimed for accuracy. This was not interpretation. This was recreation. The bedrooms were converted into hotel guest rooms. The 32 original bedrooms became 32 luxury suites. Each had its own bathroom. This required extensive work. Bathrooms had to be carved out of bedroom space. Plumbing had to be extended, but the layout made sense. Guests expected private bathrooms. Modern amenities were installed while preserving historical character. Each room had a king-size bed, sitting area, television hidden in armoire, telephone, mini bar, air conditioning controlled by thermostat. But the rooms looked historical. Original moldings were retained where possible. Fireplaces were restored. The windows were the original size and style. The decoration used period-appropriate colors and fabrics. A guest could imagine staying at OHEKA in 1925, except with modern comfort. The furniture was purchased from dealers and auctions, antiques from the 1920s, beds, dressers, desks, chairs. Each room received complete furnishing. Nothing cheap, nothing reproduction, real period pieces. The cost per room exceeded $50,000, times 32 rooms. $1.6 million just for furniture. Artwork was hung throughout, not original pieces. Those were too expensive. But period-appropriate paintings and prints, landscapes, portraits, still life compositions. Each room had multiple pieces. The hallways had artwork. The public spaces had artwork. Hundreds of pieces total. Gary haunted auctions and estate sales, building the collection piece by piece. The gardens received attention. Full restoration of 23 acres was impossible. That would cost millions. Require permanent staff of a dozen gardeners. Gary focused on the areas immediately around the house. The formal gardens closest to the building, these had to look right. Landscape architects were hired. They studied old photographs, determined original layouts, then recreated key elements. Hedges were planted where hedges had been. The species chosen for fast growth. Within a few years, they would form walls. Paths were installed, gravel. Raked smooth, edged precisely. Reflecting pools were restored. 2 of them, the largest ones. They were excavated, lined with modern waterproof membranes, filled with water. Fountains were installed, not the originals. Those were gone. But new fountains in appropriate styles. When operating, they created the right atmosphere. The statuary was mostly gone. What remained had been vandalized. Gary purchased replacements, classical statues, marble, bronze, placed at focal points throughout the gardens. The garden restoration cost $2 million. Not historically perfect, but good enough, impressive enough, appropriate enough. Guests could walk the gardens, photograph the fountains, imagine how it had been. By 1990, the total cost had reached $28 million, far more than Gary had planned. He had borrowed heavily to cover overruns. He had brought in additional investors, diluting his ownership stake. He was deeply in debt, multiple bank loans, mortgages on his other properties, personal guarantees. If OHEKA failed, he would lose everything. But OHEKA was ready. The restoration was complete. The building was magnificent. The public spaces were breathtaking. The guest rooms were luxurious. The grounds were beautiful. Now it had to succeed as a business. OHEKA opened as a hotel in 1992. The initial reception was positive. Local newspapers covered the opening. Society pages featured it. Wealthy Long Islanders came to see what had been created. They booked rooms, held dinner parties, explored the public spaces. Word spread. Weddings started being booked. OHEKA was perfect for elegant weddings. The ballroom could hold 200 guests. The gardens provided beautiful settings for photographs. Brides wanted to be married there. The rates were high. Rooms started at $500 per night. Suites were over $1,000. The ballroom rental for events was $50,000. Wedding packages started at $100,000. Only wealthy people could afford OHEKA. That was intentional. Gary was targeting the luxury market. Not volume, but margin. High prices, high service, exclusive clientele. The revenue started coming in. That first year, OHEKA generated $4 million in revenue, but the operating costs were enormous. A hotel this size required 100 employees, housekeeping staff to clean 32 suites, front desk staff for check-in and concierge services, maintenance workers to keep systems operating, kitchen staff for restaurant service, event coordinators for weddings and parties, management to oversee everything. The payroll alone exceeded $2 million annually. Then, property taxes, $200,000, insurance, utilities, supplies, marketing, everything cost money. The first year, OHEKA lost money. Revenue was $4 million. Costs were $5 million. Gary covered the deficit from his other businesses. The second year was better. Revenue increased to $5 million. Costs were controlled at $5.5 million. Still losing money, but the gap was closing. By the fifth year, 1997, OHEKA was profitable. Revenue reached $7 million. Costs were $6 million. A modest profit. Not huge, but sustainable. Gary could finally breathe. His investment was secure. He would never get rich from OHEKA. His total investment exceeded $30 million. The annual profits would never justify that investment financially. But OHEKA was preserved. It was operating. It had a future. The cost kept escalating. By 1988, Gary had spent $15 million. He needed more. He found additional investors. He took more loans. By 1990, the total was $20 million. The project was not finished. More work was needed. The gardens had to be restored, at least portions of them. Full restoration of 23 acres was impossible, but the areas immediately around the house needed landscaping. Gary hired landscape architects. They recreated some of the formal garden elements. Hedges were planted. Paths were installed. A few of the reflecting pools were restored. The work cost $2 million. By 1992, OHEKA was ready to open. The restoration had taken 7 years. The cost had reached $28 million. Gary had spent far more than he planned. He had borrowed heavily. He was deeply in debt. But OHEKA was magnificent. It looked like a palace again. The public spaces were breathtaking. The guest rooms were luxurious. The grounds were beautiful. OHEKA opened as a hotel in 1992. The initial reception was positive. Wealthy people booked rooms. Weddings were held there. Corporate events, the rates were high. Rooms started at $500 per night. Suites were over $1,000. The ballroom rental for events was $50,000. The revenue started coming in. But it was not enough. The operating costs were enormous. A hotel this size required 100 employees, housekeeping, front desk, maintenance, kitchen staff, management. The payroll was crushing. The property taxes were $200,000 annually. Insurance was expensive. Utilities were expensive. Everything was expensive. Gary struggled financially for years. He made payroll. He covered expenses. But he could not repay his loans as quickly as he had projected. His investors were unhappy. Some sued. Gary restructured the debts multiple times. He brought in new investors. He refinanced constantly. He was always on the edge of bankruptcy, but he never gave up. He believed OHEKA would succeed. It just needed time. By the 2000s, OHEKA was becoming known. Hollywood discovered it. The location was used for films. Citizen Kane used OHEKA as the model for Xanadu. The Great Gatsby filmed scenes there. Dozens of movies and television shows featured OHEKA. The publicity helped. More people wanted to visit. Stay there, host events there. Revenue increased. By 2010, OHEKA was profitable. Not hugely profitable, but it covered its costs and made modest returns. Gary's investment was secured. He would never get rich from OHEKA, but he had saved it. He had proven that restoration was possible, that historical buildings could have viable futures. In 2014, something strange happened. Gary Melius was shot in the head in OHEKA's parking lot. It was early morning. He had just arrived at the property. Someone approached his car and fired one shot. The bullet struck Gary in the head. He survived. The injury was serious, but not fatal. He recovered. The shooter was never identified. The motive was never determined. Police investigated for years. Multiple theories emerged: business dispute, romantic entanglement, random violence. Nothing was proven. The case remains unsolved. Gary returned to running OHEKA after his recovery. He never spoke publicly about the shooting. The mystery added to OHEKA's legend. Today, OHEKA operates as one of America's most expensive hotels. Room rates start at $900 per night. Suites exceed $2,000. The ballroom rents for $75,000 for events. Weddings at OHEKA cost $100,000 or more. The wealthy come from around the world. Celebrities, business executives, international visitors. They pay premium prices to stay in a palace, to walk through rooms where Otto Kahn once entertained opera stars and Broadway producers, to sleep in bedrooms designed for Gilded Age guests, to experience a level of luxury that barely exists anymore. The hotel employs 150 people. It generates millions in revenue annually. It pays substantial property taxes to Nassau County. It contributes to the local economy. It preserved a piece of architectural history that almost disappeared 3 times. Otto Kahn spent $11 million building OHEKA in 1919. That amount would be approximately $170 million today, adjusted for inflation. Gary Melius spent $30 million restoring it in the 1980s and 1990s. That was cheap by comparison, but it was still an enormous investment, an investment that almost nobody else would have made. If Gary had not appeared in 1984, OHEKA would have been demolished. The land would have been subdivided. Dozens of ordinary houses would stand where the castle stood. The limestone would have been crushed for road base. The gardens would be lawns. Nothing of Otto's dream would remain. Instead, OHEKA survives. Tourists visit. They walk through the public spaces. They see the ballroom, the grand staircase, the library. They walk through the gardens. They take photographs. They leave impressed. Most do not know the full story. They do not know about Otto giving away his fortune to support artists. They do not know about the $11 million construction cost in an era when workers earned $500 yearly. They do not know about the 75 years of abandonment and decay. They do not know about the 3 times OHEKA nearly disappeared, about the $1 listing in 1948, about the scheduled demolition in 1978, about the final crisis in 1984 when it seemed beyond saving. They see a beautiful building. They do not see the miracle that it exists at all. OHEKA should not have survived. The economics never made sense. Building it bankrupted Otto. Maintaining it was impossible for any individual. Abandoning it was inevitable. Demolishing it was logical. The land was worth more without the building. Every financial analysis said OHEKA should disappear. Yet, it survived. Not through luck, but through people who valued beauty more than practicality. Otto, who built it. Gary, who restored it. The preservationists who fought demolition. Everyone who believed some things are too beautiful to destroy even when destroying them makes economic sense. This is what makes OHEKA important. It represents a conflict that defines modern America. Do we preserve beauty even when expensive? Do we protect history even when impractical? Do we value art and architecture enough to maintain them regardless of cost? OHEKA says yes. Otto Kahn said yes when he spent his fortune building it. He could have lived comfortably on a fraction of that money. He chose to create something extraordinary instead. Gary Melius said yes when he invested $30 million restoring it. He could have built profitable strip malls with that money. He chose to save a palace instead. Both men were impractical. Both made choices that financial advisors would have opposed. Both created something that transcended ordinary economic logic. Otto built OHEKA as his monument, not to himself, but to what wealth could create when used for beauty, for art, for culture. He believed rich men had obligations beyond accumulating more money. Their wealth should elevate civilization, create spaces for beauty, support artists, make possible what the market alone could not sustain. He lived that philosophy. It bankrupted him, but it created OHEKA. Gary restored OHEKA for different reasons. He was a developer. He saw a business opportunity, but he also saw something worth saving, something unique, something that should not be lost. He could have demolished OHEKA and built condos. That would have been more profitable. He chose preservation instead, not for altruistic reasons entirely. He believed a restored OHEKA could be profitable, but profit was not the only motivation. He wanted to save something important. OHEKA today stands as proof that some dreams are too beautiful to die. Otto's dream of a French palace on a Long Island hilltop. His dream of creating a center for culture and art. His dream of proving American wealth could create beauty that rivaled Europe's centuries-old estates. That dream nearly died 3 times. In 1948, when nobody would take it for $1. In 1978, when demolition was scheduled. In 1984, when the building was condemned. Each time someone intervened. Each time people chose preservation over practicality. Each time beauty won over economics. The result is a palace that should not exist, but does. A building that makes no financial sense, but persists anyway. A monument to impractical dreams that somehow survived. Otto Kahn would be amazed to see OHEKA today. He died thinking his creation would be demolished or abandoned. He could not imagine someone spending $30 million to restore it. He could not picture it as a successful hotel. He built it as a private residence. A place for his family and friends. A venue for art and culture. Seeing it filled with strangers paying $900 per night to sleep there would shock him. But seeing it survive would justify everything. He spent his fortune creating OHEKA. He died broke because of it. His family abandoned it immediately after his death. For decades, it seemed his sacrifice had been wasted, that OHEKA would be destroyed like so many other Gilded Age estates, that nothing would remain of his dream. But OHEKA survived. His creation persists, people visit it, admire it, appreciate what he built. That vindication came 70 years after his death, but it came. OHEKA stands. His monument endures. Some dreams are too beautiful to die.